I believe that Andrew and Meghan have crossed paths. Why did they protect Andrew? And it might be because Andrew could have fired back and said that he does, in fact, know Meghan. It could be a real tit for tat moment for them.
The Yorks have always been protected by Harry and Meghan, but I think the gloves are about to come off.
There is a question that has sat at the heart of the Sussex story for years. A question so obvious, so glaring, that its very absence from the public conversation has told its own story. Why did Harry and Meghan never go after Prince Andrew? Think about that for a moment. These are two people who wrote a memoir, one of the most explosive royal books in living memory, attacking the institution they once served, naming names, recounting private conversations, airing grievances that had been quietly accumulating for years. They sat across from Oprah Winfrey and made accusations that shook the monarchy to its foundations. They have sued British newspapers. They have given interview after interview cataloguing their pain, their persecution, their version of events. And yet, through all of it, when it came to Andrew, the Duke of York, a man whose reputation has been quite comprehensively and very publicly destroyed, Harry and Meghan said almost nothing. One paragraph in spare. One. And even that, as observers noted at the time, was not about Andrew at all. It was about Harry's own security arrangements. It was not an attempt to expose his uncle. It was a complaint about himself. So why the silence? Why, when they were willing to burn so many other bridges so publicly and so completely, did the Sussexes draw the line at Andrew? What exactly did they know? And more to the point, what did Andrew know about them? Those questions, which for a long time simmered only in the background, have suddenly become very urgent indeed, because something has shifted. Something that could change everything, not just for Harry and Meghan, but for the entire British royal family, is now in motion. And the person at the centre of it all is a woman who has spent the better part of 3 decades being underestimated, overlooked, and written off. Sarah Ferguson is preparing to write a book, and the people most terrified by that prospect are not the courtiers at Buckingham Palace. They are not the king's advisors. They are not even the senior members of the firm who have spent years trying to contain one scandal after another. No, the people most terrified by what Sarah Ferguson might commit to paper are Harry and Meghan themselves. And that tells you everything you need to know. To understand why this matters, you have to understand where we are right now. The British royal family is navigating one of the most turbulent periods in modern history. The fallout from the Sussex exit is ongoing. The scandals surrounding Andrew have not gone away. They have, in fact, in recent months, deepened considerably. And the outer edges of the Windsor Circle, the York princesses, their parents, the network of relationships and obligations and compromises that sustained the old order for so long, are under pressure like never before. At the very same time, Sarah Ferguson finds herself in a position she has never been in before. Stripped of her home at Royal Lodge, cut off, effectively, from the institution she once married into. Her ex-husband, the man she never stopped supporting through every fresh disaster, now facing consequences that have left her with no safe harbour, no official role, and no obvious route back. Her daughters, Beatrice, who is 36 years old, and Eugenie, who is 34, are themselves at a crossroads, with their futures within the royal framework increasingly uncertain. And the money, as it so often has been with Fergie, is a constant, grinding problem. Reports describe her spending extended time at an ultra-discreet wellness retreat in Switzerland, where a stay can cost an eye-watering amount per night. She has been moving between borrowed villas and high-end bolt holes, while friends brief that she is effectively without funds and without a permanent home. That combination, expensive habits, and an empty account is, as anyone who has followed Fergie's story across the decades will recognise, the specific recipe that makes her most volatile and most dangerous. When you look at all of that together, the isolation, the financial pressure, the sense of having been comprehensively abandoned by the institution she served, the picture that emerges is of a woman with very little left to lose and very much to say. That is, as any publisher will tell you, an extraordinarily potent combination. And it is that combination, Fergie's desperation on one side and the Sussexes' vulnerability on the other, that is now creating a moment of genuine tension. Because what Sarah Ferguson knows about Harry and Meghan is not nothing. It is not rumour, not speculation, not the kind of third-hand gossip that floats around royal circles and can be dismissed. It is the real thing, first-hand, witnessed, heard directly, and potentially profoundly damaging.
Harry and Meghan are said to be watching developments extremely closely. They are acutely aware that a memoir of that scale would inevitably revisit the most contentious chapters of recent royal history, and they are anxious about how their actions and private exchanges might be framed.
Sarah Margaret Ferguson, Duchess of York, 65 years old. She has spent the better part of 4 decades in the orbit of the British royal family without ever quite being of it, accepted when useful, tolerated when manageable, and dropped, repeatedly, when she became inconvenient. She knows how this family operates. She knows its rhythms, its hypocrisies, its private loyalties, and its very public cruelties. She sat at its table during some of the most tumultuous decades in modern royal history. The War of the Windsors, the divorce, Diana, the rebuilding, the long, slow rehabilitation of the monarchy under the Queen, and then the new dramas, the Sussex crisis, Andrew's unravelling, the relentless pressure of a modern media environment that has very little patience for the old rules of deference and discretion. Through all of it, Fergie observed. And Fergie, whatever else you might say about her, remembers, she is not a woman known for holding back. Her 1996 memoir, written in the raw aftermath of her divorce from Andrew, was so candid it cost her the friendship of Diana, of all people. A single throwaway line about borrowing Diana's shoes was taken as a betrayal. You do not publish something that loses you Diana's friendship by accident. You publish it because you have decided, consciously, that your truth matters more than other people's comfort. That version of Fergie, the one who writes what she actually thinks, who speaks plainly, who operates on emotion rather than calculation, is the version that Harry and Meghan should be very worried about right now. Because the calculated, strategic Fergie, the one who protected Andrew through everything, who stayed loyal to the Queen, who kept the secrets she was entrusted with, that version required certain things to remain true. It required her to have something to protect, something to lose. And she is losing those things one by one, at quite a pace. Publishing executives have already begun circling, by all accounts. Major houses have approached Ferguson about a memoir. She has written or co-written more than 60 titles across her career, and understands precisely how this industry works. She knows, having watched Harry do it, and watched the world respond, exactly what the right story can command. And she is now, for the first time in a very long time, in a position where she can write it.
Ferguson has never been known for diplomatic phrasing or softening her opinions for the sake of harmony. She tends to speak plainly and emotionally about her experiences. That unpredictability, the sense that she might be candid to the point of discomfort, is precisely what is unsettling the Sussexes and indeed the entire British royal family.
The reports began surfacing quietly, as these things tend to do. Whispers in publishing circles, briefings to trusted journalists. The suggestion, carefully floated, carefully deniable, that Sarah Ferguson was in conversation with major publishers about a memoir, not another children's book, not another lifestyle title. A proper, no-holds-barred account of her life inside the Windsor family. Insider sources were quoted, describing the prospect in terms that left little room for ambiguity. There is every possibility, one source said, that Sarah will formalize a deal and commit her account of events to paper for a very substantial advance, and the mere prospect of that has set nerves jangling. Because once it is in print, there is no controlling the narrative or containing the fallout. That phrase, no controlling the narrative, is the key to understanding why this moment is so significant. Because controlling the narrative is, and always has been, the central project of the British royal family. The institution's survival depends on its ability to shape the story that is told about it. When that control slips, as it did with Diana, as it did with the Oprah interview, as it did with the tidal wave of revelations that engulfed Andrew, the consequences are severe and lasting. A Fergie memoir, written now, in these circumstances, with no palace loyalties left to honour, and no career within the institution left to protect, would represent perhaps the most significant threat to that narrative control in the entire Sussex era. More dangerous, potentially, than Spare. More dangerous than the Netflix documentary. More dangerous even than the Oprah interview, because Fergie is not the subject of the stories she would tell. She is the witness, and witnesses are the most dangerous kind of storyteller there is. Tom Sykes, royal journalist and royalist Substack writer, has been tracking this situation closely and has concluded that the combination of factors Fergie now faces makes her potentially the most dangerous book looming over. The royal family right now, not another Sussex volume. Fergie. And from someone who has followed this family for years, that assessment carries real weight.
Fergie is preparing to go nuclear, to drop the bomb that for a long time she has resisted as she grifts for money from whoever is likely to give her a handout. But all of a sudden, as she is completely marginalised, both by the business community, the entertainment community, and the British royal family, she knows the way for the big payday is a Prince Harry-style autobiography.
Here is where we need to be very precise. Because when people talk about what Fergie knows, what she could put in a book that would cause genuine damage to Harry and Meghan, there are really two distinct categories of information, and they are not equally dangerous. The first category is what she witnessed directly during the Sussex years, the way Meghan behaved when she joined the royal family, the treatment of staff, the dynamics in private that were so at odds with the carefully managed public image the Sussexes were projecting. Fergie was not on the outer circle of these events. Harry and Meghan were closest to the Yorks of anyone within the extended royal family. They gravitated towards them. They felt, apparently, a kinship, two branches of the family that saw themselves as operating outside the main structure, united by a shared sense of grievance against William and Catherine. That proximity is significant. It means Fergie did not hear about Meghan's behaviour secondhand. She did not read about it in newspapers or hear it from courtiers. She was there. She saw things. She had conversations. She formed opinions, strong ones, based on direct experience that have never been made public because, until now, she has had reasons to keep them private. The second category of information is more delicate, far more delicate. It concerns the question of what Meghan may or may not have known about the circles she moved in before she became a royal. The social world she inhabited during her years as an actress, the private members' clubs, the yacht trips, the charity events, and the network of extraordinarily wealthy and connected individuals whose names have, in recent years, become freighted with a significance nobody anticipated. And here is where the story becomes genuinely remarkable, because this is not simply a matter of speculation or inference. There is documented photographic evidence of the social circles Meghan moved in, evidence that the mainstream media has chosen, largely, not to explore, evidence that connects people and places in ways that raise serious and as yet unanswered questions.
The mainstream media have not reported on the fact Meghan Markle was friends with Jeffrey Epstein's girlfriend. That is a fact. They had been on holiday together. There are numerous pictures of them on a yacht holiday. So the fact the press have never mentioned this and the mainstream media continue to offer some very questionable protection to the facts, this rings my alarm bells massively.
Virginia Giuffre's attorney, David Boies, is on public record stating that he believed Meghan Markle knew things relevant to his client's case, specifically things about Andrew. He wanted her testimony. He believed she had information. That statement was made in a legal context by a serious lawyer, and it has never been adequately explained. It has also been almost entirely ignored by the mainstream media, which is itself, as any thoughtful observer would note, rather telling. Harry and Meghan attacked almost everyone in Spare. They had sharp words for Charles, for Camilla, for William, about courtiers, about the British press. They left almost nobody unscathed. And yet Andrew, a man whose public humiliation had been so total and so complete that he barely functions in public life anymore, received one paragraph. One. If there was nothing between them, no history, no knowledge, no connection that required careful handling, you might expect them to have treated Andrew the way they treated everyone else. They didn't. And that silence is, in retrospect, deafening.
David Boyes, who was Virginia Giuffre's attorney, wanted Meghan Markle to give evidence in the civil trial, saying that there were things about Andrew that she knew.
And that is further confirmation that I believe that Andrew and Meghan have crossed paths. Meghan was friends and going on holidays with Epstein's girlfriend.
Step back for a moment from the personal and the political and consider the commercial reality, because that reality is, in its own way, just as alarming for the Sussexes as any of the personal revelations Fergie might make. Harry's memoir reportedly commanded an advance somewhere in the region of $20 million and became, upon publication, the fastest-selling non-fiction book in recent history. Fergie's agents will be doing that calculation. They will be thinking about what a no-holds-barred account from the mother of two princesses, the ex-wife of the most scandalized Windsor, the woman who is in the room during so much of what happened, what that is actually worth. And the number, they will have concluded, is very large indeed. That is the thing about Fergie that people consistently underestimate. She is not naive about the industry. She is not stumbling towards a deal she doesn't understand. She has written or co-written more than 60 titles. She has spent decades understanding what publishing rewards and what it punishes. She understands, having watched Harry do it and watched the world respond, exactly how much the right story commands. And she is now in possession of circumstances, personal, financial, emotional, that make writing that story not just tempting but rational. There is also the question of loyalty, or more specifically, the erosion of it, because for years, Fergie's discretion was underwritten by a form of institutional loyalty that was itself underwritten by the practical benefits of remaining within the Windsor orbit, even at a distance, even in disgrace. There was always the faint warmth of belonging to something larger than herself. That warmth is gone. The benefits of loyalty have been withdrawn, and with them, the calculation that made silence the sensible option.
She's got to put something out there. She's got to put something sensational. She's got to put something in there that is going to have worldwide global news, people dissecting it, people talking about it. It's got to be truly sensational. And yeah, I mean, the easiest way to do it is to say things about Harry and Meghan.
But of course, none of this should come as a surprise to anyone who has followed the Fergie story across the years, because the pattern here is not new. The desperation, the proximity to danger, the willingness to cross lines that others consider uncrossable. This has been the defining rhythm of Sarah Ferguson's life for decades. Her 1,996 memoir was, for its time, extraordinary. Published in the wreckage of her marriage, it named names, described private moments, shared things that royal insiders considered deeply disloyal. It cost her Diana's friendship, which was perhaps the most valuable friendship she had. She published it anyway, because she needed the money and she needed to tell her story. The calculation she made then is the same one she is making now. The variables are different, the stakes are higher, but the essential logic is identical. And then there is the shadow of Andrew's associations, which has touched the Ferguson story in ways that are only now becoming fully clear. Leaked emails, made public as part of the ongoing fallout from various document releases, revealed discussions about using Beatrice and Eugenie's names and connections to help resolve a financial crisis Fergie was facing at the time. The plan appears to have involved approaching various wealthy individuals about funding that would effectively leverage the princess's royal status. Whether this scheme ever came to anything is unclear. What is clear is that it was discussed, that it was contemplated. That context is why William's insistence on a financial audit of Beatrice and Eugenie is so significant. It is not primarily about punishing them for their parents' choices. It is about understanding the full extent of any entanglement. Because until that is understood, until there is clarity about where the money came from and what was exchanged for it, the risk to the institution remains unquantified. And unquantified risk is, for a monarchy trying to stabilise and rebuild, unacceptable. Fergie, standing at the centre of all of this, knows where the bodies are buried, metaphorically speaking. She was there during the years in question. She was there during the Sussex years. She was there during the private moments and private conversations that never made it into the official record. She is one of the very few people who can connect the dots across all of these different chapters of royal history. And that makes her uniquely, extraordinarily, potentially dangerous.
A $20 million advance, like Harry received, is what she wants. And the people who are most terrified about this are Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Because it is Fergie, of course, who could reveal all about what really went on with this couple and the British royal family and Andrew behind the scenes.
And then there is Harry, because whatever Meghan knew or didn't know, whatever connections she may or may not have had before she entered the royal family, Harry's silence on Andrew is its own story, and arguably the more significant one, because Harry was there. Harry grew up in this family. Harry attended the same events, moved in the same circles, had the same access to private knowledge about his uncle's behaviour that any close family member would have had. He was in his early 20s when the first serious allegations about Andrew's behaviour began to emerge publicly. Old enough to understand what was being said, old enough to form a view. And he chose, throughout the years that followed, through every revelation, every press conference disaster, through the entirety of his time writing Spare, to say almost nothing. The one paragraph he did include was, as has been widely noted, not actually about Andrew at all. It was about Harry's security arrangements. It was a complaint about institutional inconsistency. It was not an attempt to expose his uncle or hold him accountable. It was the act of someone who had very carefully, very deliberately, decided to leave certain things unsaid. When you look at what Harry was willing to say about Charles, about Camilla, about William, about Catherine, about the British press, and then you look at what he was not willing to say about Andrew, the contrast is extraordinary. The things Harry chose to include in Spare caused real pain to real people. The thing he chose to exclude was almost certainly more dramatic than anything he included, but it stayed out, carefully, deliberately. Why? The answer, when you follow the logic of it, points back to the same place it always does: mutual protection. The Yorks and the Sussexes, two branches of the family that found themselves on the outside looking in, had an arrangement, not a formal one perhaps, but an understanding. We don't go after each other, because if we do, we might not like what comes out, and that understanding, it now appears, was the one promise neither side ever broke, until now.
Harry's been brainwashed by Meghan. Who could disagree? Since they got married, he suddenly hates his country, hates his family, hates being a royal, and goes off for a very boring life in California. This is not a marriage. This is a hostage situation.
Let us be very clear about what this mutual protection arrangement actually meant in practice, because it was not simply a matter of not mentioning each other in interviews. It was deeper than that. It was an active, ongoing choice, made repeatedly over several years, to shield the Yorks from scrutiny, at a time when that scrutiny could have been devastating. Think about the timing. The most intense period of Harry and Meghan's public campaign against the royal family, the Oprah interview, Spare, the Netflix documentary, coincided almost exactly with the period during which the full scale of Andrew's situation was becoming clear: the legal settlement, the stripping of his military titles, his effective removal from public life. These were moments of maximum vulnerability for the York family. And Harry and Meghan, who had demonstrably shown that they were willing to use maximum vulnerability as a weapon, said nothing about Andrew. Nothing material. Nothing that could have turned an already bad situation significantly worse. That restraint was a choice, a conscious, deliberate choice. And choices like that do not come without reasons. They come without reasons only when there is something to be gained from the silence, or something to be lost from speaking. The tit-for-tat dynamic that observers have identified is the most persuasive explanation. If Meghan had, in her previous life, moved in circles that intersected with people whose company Andrew also kept, if there are photographs, if there are witnesses, if there are accounts of shared evenings and shared acquaintances that have never been made public, then Andrew would have had, in that knowledge, a form of leverage, a silent arrangement. You don't go after me, I don't go after you. And everyone holds their breath and hopes the relevant files stay sealed. The files, of course, have not stayed sealed. They never do. And that is precisely why the equilibrium that has held for several years is now beginning to fracture. Because Fergie, the person who knows all of this, who has been present through all of it, is no longer bound by the old arrangement. She has, in the most literal sense, lost the things that were keeping her quiet.
There's no way that you can't tell me Meghan wouldn't have got an invite through some of her friends to attend the big, lavish parties that Epstein was known for throwing, with lots of girls, some professionals, some not, some models, some D-list cable TV actresses desperate for fame. You know, so there is a good chance that Meghan does know something about Andrew, because she never said anything. Harry never said anything with all of their attacks.
One of the most persistent and painful dynamics of the Sussex years has been the gap between what Harry and Meghan have said publicly about their time in the royal family and what the people who were actually there, staff, courtiers, family members, know to be true. That gap has never been adequately closed. Not because the alternative accounts don't exist. They do. They exist in abundance. But because the people who hold those accounts have chosen, for one reason or another, not to make them public, Fergie, if she chooses, could close that gap. Not entirely, perhaps, but significantly. She was close enough to Harry and Meghan during the royal years to have witnessed how they operated. The staff treatment, the demands, the way Meghan navigated the institution, or declined to navigate it on its own terms. These things were experienced by many people. They have been reported by many journalists, but they have never been confirmed by someone who is inside the family itself. That is the crucial distinction. When a courtier says Meghan was difficult to work for, it can be dismissed as establishment briefing. When a journalist reports allegations of difficult behaviour, it can be framed as a smear campaign. But when a woman who married into this family, who sat at the same table at Christmas, who had her own complex and difficult relationship with the institution and cannot easily be accused of bias towards it, when that woman confirms what everyone has been saying for years, the dismissals become significantly harder to sustain. This is what Harry and Meghan are really afraid of. Not gossip, not rumour, confirmation. Fergie, speaking from her own experience, saying, "Yes, I saw it. I was there. And what I saw confirms what you have always suspected." The accounts of how Meghan treated the Queen, the woman Fergie has consistently described with deep affection and genuine reverence, the woman whose dogs Fergie took on after her passing, would carry a moral weight that no courtier briefing or tabloid story could match.
Meghan really was a force when she joined that family, of just being terrible to everyone. And Fergie could, in fact, mention that. As I said, Fergie is loyal to Queen Elizabeth II, and I don't think that will change in the book. And Meghan, obviously, was terrible to her after everything that she gave them. So for that now to come out will again show that Harry and Meghan have lied.
But there is another dimension to this story, one that is, in some ways, even more complicated than the Sussex angle. Because Sarah Ferguson's decision about whether to write this book is not just about herself, it is about her daughters and her grandchildren. And the question of whether Beatrice and Eugenie have any future at all within the royal family framework, or whether that door has been permanently closed. Prince William has made his position very clear. He has excluded the York princesses from Royal Ascot this year. He has reportedly instructed senior royals not to be photographed with them. He has requested a financial audit of their affairs, an audit that, by multiple accounts, they have declined to undergo. And he has drawn, quietly but firmly, a line around the core of the institution that does not include them. Beatrice is 36 years old. Eugenie is 34. They have children of their own. They have husbands with careers and ambitions. They are not simply extensions of their parents' story. They are women in their own right, trying to build their own lives, navigating an impossible situation they did not entirely create, and yet cannot entirely escape. Celia Walden, a columnist for the Daily Telegraph, and someone with personal knowledge of the York princesses, recently made a passionate case that they are being judged unfairly, that they have never sold their stories, never published memoirs, never given hostile interviews, never embarrassed the institution in any of the ways their parents have, that the late Queen loved them and wanted them provided for, and that those facts should count for something. It is, as defences go, a compelling one, and yet there is the question of the audit. There is the question of what those financial records might show. There is the question of business arrangements reportedly contemplated at a time of acute family financial pressure that may or may not have been acted upon. The fact that William is insisting on transparency before he is willing to reintegrate them tells you that he has reasons to insist that go beyond a general desire for good governance. Fergie knows the answers to those questions. She knows what was discussed, and what was decided, and what happened next. And if she writes a book, those answers, or the absence of them, the careful silences and strategic omissions, will tell their own story about what her daughters knew and when they knew it.
I do believe that there is a chance that if Beatrice and Eugenie can save their bacon, as it were, by distancing themselves from their mother, they will advise her not to do something as bad and as damaging as that.
The problem is, I just don't think that there is a way back now for Eugenie and Beatrice.
And this brings us to William, because the choices being made at the centre of the royal family right now, and they are being made firmly, deliberately, without sentimentality, are William's choices. He is the future, he knows it, and he is behaving accordingly. William's exclusion of the York princesses is not simply a personal decision, it is a statement of institutional policy. The standards of transparency and accountability that this family demands are not negotiable. They are not subject to exemption based on family feeling or historical connection. They apply to everyone. And if you are not willing to meet them, you do not get the benefits of association with an institution that is working very hard to rebuild its credibility. Previous generations managed their embarrassments differently. They absorbed them, managed them, quietly shuffled people to the side, while maintaining the outward forms of family unity. The Queen was a master of this. Her capacity to absorb scandal without appearing destabilized by it was one of the defining qualities of her long reign. William does not appear to operate that way. He has concluded that the old approach no longer works, that the only viable strategy is radical clarity. Here is the line: meet the standard or find yourself outside it. The implications for the York family, and therefore for Fergie's calculations about her book, are stark. Because what William is effectively saying is, there is nothing left to save. The bridge is already burnt. If you are hoping that restraint now will earn back some form of access or acceptance, you are hoping for something that is not on offer. Which means the only question remaining is what Fergie does with the freedom that total exclusion paradoxically grants her.
Something has to be done to preserve the future of the monarchy because Harry and Andrew are both massive risks, and it's a risk that needs to be assessed very quickly here. And I think definitely there could be a route forwards where their titles are stripped, and I think that's the only way to go.
There is a broader truth about the Sussex story that the Fergie situation illuminates with unusual clarity. And it is this: the relationships Harry and Meghan have formed, and the relationships they have subsequently burned, reveal, over time, a consistent pattern. A pattern of using, discarding, and then being surprised when the people they used and discarded have things to say. Fergie is not the first person who was once close to Harry and Meghan, and who now represents a potential source of damaging revelations. She is not the first person whose loyalty was taken for granted, whose discretion was assumed, and who is now, for various reasons, less constrained by that loyalty than she once was. The list of people who fall into this category, who know things, who were there, who have stayed quiet for reasons that may not last forever, is longer than Harry and Meghan would be comfortable acknowledging. The pattern goes back to before Meghan's time in the royal family, to the friendships she maintained before Harry, to the people who were part of her life and who, at various points, found themselves on the wrong side of her. Meghan's relationship with her father, with her half-siblings, with friends who were close to her during the Suits years. The consistent thread is not bad luck or misunderstanding. It is something more structural, a tendency to prioritize self-interest so completely that the well-being and dignity of the people around her becomes secondary. The Queen gave Harry and Meghan an extraordinary opportunity. She gave Meghan, specifically, something that most people would consider one of the greatest honours available, a place in one of the world's oldest and most respected institutions, the chance to build a life and a legacy that would outlast any individual ambition. And what happened? By the accounts of the people who were there, Meghan found it insufficient. She wanted more than the institution was willing to give, and less than it required in return. And when that tension became irresolvable, they did not leave quietly.
The truth about Meghan is, she will always find a way in which she thinks she can win. and the casualties are irrelevant, whether it's her father, her old best friends, her first husband. There always will be casualties in her life. The question is, when will Harry become the casualty?
So where does all of this leave the relationship between the Sussexes and the royal family right now? The honest answer is, in a worse place than it has been at almost any point since the exit. And that is saying something. The rapprochement that some had hoped for, the gradual softening of positions, the quiet re-establishment of contact, the possibility that time and distance might eventually produce something resembling reconciliation, has not happened. If anything, the trajectory has been in the opposite direction. William's position towards his brother has hardened. King Charles, despite his illness, despite the emotional weight of the estrangement, has found himself hemmed in by the impossible diplomatic mathematics of a situation where any outward sign of warmth towards Harry and Meghan is perceived as a betrayal of William and Catherine. The Sussexes, for their part, have not made reconciliation easier. The brand continues. The content continues. The commercial exploitation of royal adjacency, the titles, the connections, the suggestion of access and insider knowledge continues. Harry has, by various accounts, expressed private yearning for a different kind of life, a quieter life, a life closer to the family he left and the country he grew up in. But wanting something privately and behaving in ways consistent with achieving it publicly are two very different things. And the gap between Harry's private feelings and his public behaviour has been, for a long time, the defining tragedy of his story. And now, into this already complicated picture, comes Fergie, a wild card, a woman with her own grievances, her own financial pressures, her own complex feelings about the family and the institution and the people within it. A woman who has been watching Harry and Meghan's saga from a position of uncomfortable proximity, and who has reached a point where the calculus of silence no longer adds up in her favour. The Sussexes know this. The palace knows this. The question of how to manage a potential Fergie memoir, how to contain it, respond to it, or preempt it, is not a theoretical exercise. It is an active, urgent, genuinely difficult problem, and there is no obviously right answer.
They know a lot about how Prince Harry and Meghan Markle behaved during their time in the British royal family. Because even though Harry and Meghan are now trying to distance themselves from the Yorks, they were closest to the Yorks out of anyone, because they loved going around to the Yorks and being able to bitch about William and Catherine and sort of act as if they were like on the outer of the family together.
Step back from the immediate drama for a moment and look at the bigger picture. Because the Fergie story is not simply about one woman deciding whether to write a book. It is about the limits of silence as a strategy. It is about what happens when the people who know the most about a powerful story have nothing left to lose. And it is about the extraordinary, ongoing, seemingly inexhaustible capacity of the Sussex saga to generate new threats, new complications, new sources of potential damage, not just for Harry and Meghan, but for everyone who has ever been close to them. The Netflix situation is another dimension of this same problem. Reports have emerged that the streaming giant is considering revisiting its dramatization of royal life, not as a full returning series, but as special episodes focused on specific royal scandals. The Andrew story is understood to be at or near the top of that list. A high-profile dramatization, one that reaches the audiences The Crown reached, that shapes popular understanding the way The Crown shaped understanding of Diana and Charles, would be a significant cultural moment, one that neither the palace nor the Sussexes would have any meaningful control over. For millions of people, particularly younger audiences who did not live through these events, dramatization is effectively history. It is how they learn what happened. An episode drawing on the publicly available record and the context of everything that has since emerged would inevitably invite comparison between the circles that surrounded Andrew and the circles that have been documented around others. In this story, circles that, as the evidence increasingly suggests, overlapped in ways that nobody has yet been fully willing to explore in public. That loss of control, the sense that the story is no longer manageable, that the people who once held the narrative threads have lost their grip on them, is the defining anxiety of the royal family's current moment. They cannot unsay what Harry said in Spare. They cannot unshow what Netflix showed in the documentary. All they can do is manage what comes next. And what comes next if Fergie goes ahead will be harder to manage than almost anything that has come before. Because Harry and Meghan could respond to Spare by saying the palace was briefing against them. They could respond to Netflix by saying the documentarians were sympathetic. They cannot respond to Fergie by saying she is an establishment plant. She is, if anything, the establishment's most problematic estranged family member. She has no reason to protect the palace. She has no reason to protect Harry and Meghan. She is, for the first time in her public life, entirely her own agent. And that freedom, that absence of obligation, that liberation from the need to manage anyone else's interests alongside her own, is what makes her, right now, the most interesting and the most dangerous woman in the British royal story. Sarah Ferguson is standing at a crossroads. On one side, silence, and with it, the faint, diminishing hope that somehow, some way, there is still a path back for her daughters, for her grandchildren, for some version of a life connected to the institution she once married into. On the other side, the book, the big payday, the final say, the chance to tell her truth on her terms, and in doing so, to potentially confirm what so many people have suspected for so long about Harry, about Meghan, and about the hidden architecture of the Sussex years. It is, when you sit with it, an extraordinary position to be in, and the fact that Harry and Meghan's own choices, their silences, their mutual protection arrangements, their treatment of the people around them, contributed directly to the circumstances that now threaten them most, is its own kind of poetic justice. But what I find myself wondering as we reach the end of this story is this. If you were in Fergie's position, if you knew what she knows, if you had seen what she has seen, if you had given decades of loyalty to an institution that has now shut the door on you completely, would you stay silent? And do you think, honestly, that Harry and Meghan deserve the protection that silence would give them? Those are the questions I'd love to hear your thoughts on. Drop them in the comments. I read every single one, and this community's perspective on stories like this is always something I genuinely look forward to. Thank you so much for being here and for watching all the way to the end. It genuinely means everything. This channel exists because of your loyalty and your curiosity and your willingness to engage with these stories seriously, and I never take that for granted. If you found this video worthwhile, please do hit the like button. It makes a real difference to how this content reaches people. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a wonderful moment to do that. Share this with anyone you think would find it as fascinating as you have. We'll see you in the next one.